Hello people of YouTube, Mishka Valhalla here. So I wanted to touch up on some things in this video, um, sort of like a follow-up on a previous video I did. I did a video on the Fylgja and the familiar, and in this video I wanted to particularly focus on the Fylgja as well as different parts of the self if we're talking in a Norse shamanic context. But we'll mainly be focusing on, of course, is the Fylgja. Without any further ado, we shall begin. So, as we know, the Fylgja is sort of an extension of the self, a part of the self. And the way I described it in the last video is sort of like a familiar, sort of like an animal companion that walks with you. And that is probably not entirely the best way to put it. The best way to probably put it is that not only is it a companion, but in a way it is you. It is an extension of yourself. And that's what I mean by different parts of the self. In other cultures there are similar aspects. Where your body, when you die, your spirit inhabits different parts of the earth or different parts of the world. And in heathenry, your body, of course, your liker, your body, your corpse can be inhabited by your spirit, just like your spirit can dwell in Helheim, with most of the dead, if not all the dead. But concepts of life and death are very different in a pre-Christian context. When talking about the Norse people, there is an awareness of being from nature, sort of where, humanity isn't necessarily separate from the animal kingdom, and that is expressed in a very animistic way, hence the word animal, an animal kingdom. We being humans, primates, descendants of literal animals, we have a direct connection to the animal kingdom. Whether or not our ancestors knew technically that we were primates, or whether or not they still knew we were animals. And when we're talking about the Fylgja, that is an extension of our inner self. Our Fylgja essentially is an animalistic version of ourselves. For Berserker, they would have a bear. Sometimes this can appear as an animal companion that walks beside you, or it can be an animal that is within you, essentially a part of you. So maybe it could differ per individual, because I know not all of us are the same, obviously. Even if you're delving into a particular path, such as this one, when we're talking about Norse paganism, you do have other parts of yourself, such as your appearance, your ghostly appearance, your huger, your mind and your memory, your mini, the different parts of yourself. In a way, in the Norse tradition, it's less of, a static image of yourself and more so, your literal mind, the essence of your consciousness being able to leap through the tree of life, throughout the earth and into another reality, and essentially your mind suits that reality in a different form, and that's essentially, an idea of, world accepting views, that the body is just as important as the mind is, and the spirit or soul. The soul in the Christian concept is something that needs to be saved, something that's delicate, something that's literally just you in this life, but just an image of you, a ghost of yourself. While in a more animistic perspective, the self could take any form, really. It could be any sort of different shape it wants to be. Excuse me. I don't have COVID, I promise. But, like, for instance, you look at me, and you would see me, physical me, but that doesn't mean on the inside I look like this. That doesn't mean my spirit or my mind looks the way I do. In fact, in my personal opinion, I won't get too deep into that, I very much do not look like myself. The idea is that, nothing is cut and dry. There's sort of like a fluidity to things. So more of a natural world accepting thing. World accepting spiritual mentality. Realizing that matter and the essence of consciousness are connected in the tree of life. It's like the idea is that some would describe it differently, but the way I like to describe the earth is as one large organism, and essentially that's an essence, a version of the tree of life. The earth is directly connected to tree of life because the earth is Inengard, while Utgard is the great void, space, Ganungagap. Anyway, before I get too deep in cosmology and parallels with science and mythology and all that fun shit, let me get back to the main topic. The Fylgja. The Fylgja is a very natural, animalistic version of yourself that typically goes into other realities for you, or your Hugi, your mind, essentially, when practicing Seidar, or even possibly forms of shamanism. Essentially the idea is to, put your mind in that reality, so that, you're in sort of a meditative state per se. Different people can do it differently, per individual, but essentially it's what people would call like an astral travel or a projection. Obviously differing per person how it works and all that, but essentially it's going to different realities, and that's what essentially many of our ancestors were doing, was they were trying to get in the mind of an animal, or they were trying to become their animal and enter a reality that suited that animal, or the animal could suit that reality. And I know that it does sound confusing. There are some other YouTubers out there, especially Arth Hedier, who talks about animism, through a Norse context, and perhaps he's better at explaining things more clearly. But even then, it's still a concept that's hard for a lot of people in, especially Western society, to grasp, because so many things that are in our older traditions are typically demonized nowadays, such as serpent imagery, the underworld, anything that has to do with darkness, or the color black. I mean, back then black was like dark soil, like rich soil, was something sacred. The earth was sacred to our ancestors, and over time, we've sort of focused away from the earth, more towards the heavens. While you go more east, you see, a veneration of the dragon, aka the serpent, or the dragon, and essentially they're related, but besides the point. The dragon is venerated still in the east. There's still an awareness of the underworld in some traditions. The spirit world being parallel to the physical world. You definitely see that in Shinto. You can see that in Native American traditions. But when you go to Europe, you see that demonetization of not only the underworld, but of course dragons. Because dragons, of course, came from the underworld, being especially in the Norse tradition, possibly the Druidic traditions, and some other Celtic traditions. I know the Druids were part of the Celts, but besides the point. The dragon was venerated as a very earthly symbol, a very energetic symbol, elemental symbol, a very ancient sort of thing. And a lot of animal spirits and entities and even deities were venerated, and many of their powers were elemental in nature, and very animalistic. Like I said, if you've watched many of my previous videos, or, of course, studied human history, in ancient times there were more animalistic deities. But as we become more human-like, or more civilized, our gods essentially started to become more human-like. we started to mold deities together, but then again, most of the time we straight up got new deities, because people, essentially, it's my belief that people in this life, essentially became as powerful as they could in this reality, and then they were able to transcend and become not only gods in this life, but in the next life. They were essentially able to transcend and understand the deeper earthly wisdoms, of Yggdrasil, the tree of life. And, he made his sacrifices. Odin, I'm talking about in particular, he made his sacrifices, he sought knowledge and power, and he learned the mysteries of the runes, ancient wisdom. He befriended and sought wisdom from the Jotuns themselves as well as numbers of other gods and entities. He even did bad things as well, but that's interesting about pagan gods is, they're obviously human-like. They make mistakes, they don't know everything, and there's sort of an acceptance of, the idea that, everything has a limit. Not everything is all-knowing and all-powerful. There's like nothing that, essentially has the ultimate say. That's, there is fate, and there's all this stuff going on in the universe or the cosmos or whatever, but there's so much deeper understanding to everything, and I know I'm trailing off and I do that a lot, but essentially the Fylgja, it is not something that is separate from you. It's a part of you, a part of your consciousness. How you have like a subconscious mind, and then you have a present mind, an emotional mind. You just have different parts of your existence, your conscious experience, that are just in a way unique. Excuse me. And it expresses itself through the different things you do in your life, and even sometimes, well, a lot of the time, what your ancestors passed down to you. Your ancestors could have very well had the same Fylgja, the same animal, and essentially that animal was you. You were part of that conscious animal, and you can become that animal in a number of other realities. Maybe this one, I don't know yet. I mean, obviously, but there's a lot of interesting things, from a metaphysical standpoint to look into. Other than that, but yeah, there are also cases where your Fylgja, couldn't. I think there's your Fylgja and your Fylgja. Your Fylgja, in a way, could essentially be, a more humanoid version of yourself. Maybe even an ancestor that expresses themselves heavily through you. And that is a very heathen concept, of course, obviously, but but what makes it particularly heathen is its sort of an acceptance of inheritance alongside concepts of reincarnation, yet it's not literal reincarnation. In a sense, it's like, like me looking like my mother, more like my father, but instead of inheriting my father's powers or gifts per se, I would inherit the powers and gifts of my mother. Because, or, if I'm talking ancient ancestors, like, I'm not saying I am, but let's say I'm related to Beowulf. Like, I end up looking like Beowulf. I end up, essentially having my life set up in a way that's parallel to Beowulf or something like that. Or I have the skills of Beowulf, or something like that. Essentially they are playing an active role in your life, in your consciousness. They are essentially a version of you that you can become in another reality. And, even as I talk about this, I'm still learning. Sometimes I talk and I am learning new things about the things I am trying to learn about, and that I am learning about, but there are more things to learn about the things you're learning about. It never ends, so you're gonna end up going in circles, essentially. But, at the same time, you won't, because you'll just keep going and going and going, because essentially it paints a bigger picture, and it's quite fabulous. And I don't know. I could go on forever about that. And some of you are probably thinking, oh, are you talking about parallel realities? Yes, I'm talking about parallel realities, but I'm sure some of you are probably asking me, are you talking about like alternate realities, like here, like I'm here, but instead I have like black hair instead of blonde hair? No, that's not what I'm talking about. But I do believe in such instances, but obviously that is beyond the 9 realms, or beyond Norse cosmology. At least from my own understanding. I mean, in a way it could be parallel to what is parallel. I'm not gonna like go all over the place with my thoughts on parallel realities. And well, I'm gonna talk more about parallel realities, because those are the 9 realms that I'm talking about when I talk about parallel realities. Realities that are closely linked to the earth itself. Alternate realities would probably be like some sort of multiverse type of deal. Like you're entering just another version of this universe. What we're doing right now. Maybe in this multiverse, I'm a Christian. I'm a hardcore Christian. I'm just talking about hardcore Christian shit instead of hardcore pagan shit. I know I'm just going off in this video, but I'm sure you know what I mean. Yeah, my specialties are more interested in the parallel realities of Yggdrasil, the 9 realms. That being my path, of course. And essentially, maybe you don't have a different version of yourself per reality, but maybe you do, because that's the thing, we're still learning. When it comes to Norse spirituality, maybe per realm, each part of your body is suited per realm, and in a way that could be possible, because the body, in heathenry, when you die, it's very common in Norse tradition to be buried in a mound rather than burned. So your descendants can approach your mound and meditate on it. Such instances were seen in the sagas. It can be read in the sagas, where people go to the bones of their ancestors and meditate on the bones. They do utaseta. They go out and they call upon their ancestors and essentially do rituals around the burial mounds so they can seek their guidance. So in a way, we have different versions of us, or at least one version of us, particularly in Midgard, and that is our body, even after we die. And in a sense, a part of us can stay in our body because it contains the memories of essentially our lifetimes, so we can, and perhaps we can find other bodies we had throughout other lifetimes and visit those, and essentially rediscover more about our past, but then again, that is there are different concepts of reincarnation when it comes to the different traditions. And when it comes to Norse tradition, a lot of people don't talk about the reincarnation in the sense of your conscious self living multiple times in this reality, in a sense, in a heathen sense, it's staying in hell or going to Valhalla, Folkvanger, whatever great hall you go to, whatever realm you go to. It's not the Hindu sense, is what I mean, or the Buddhist sense of reincarnation. It is more of, your traits being passed down through your generations, and essentially your descendant of yours inheriting your power and your abilities, and essentially you being a guardian or a Fylgja to the person that is your descendant. But then, of course, we don't truly know whether or not both versions of reincarnation existed in Norse traditions, because I personally believe there were exceptions in Norse tradition where, there were beliefs that somebody, had multiple lifetimes, and were able to remember and recall certain lifetimes in this reality, and realize that essentially they are older souls, or older spirits. Anyway, all this talk about, different parts of the self all boils down to you as an individual. Who are you? Where does your family come from? Where does your spirit come from? who are you deep down? Who is your higher self? Who are you aiming to be? What is your goal in this lifetime? Or, as I could say, incarnation? What is your motive? Essentially, and that's what you're doing in Midgard. What you're doing in Midgard is essentially understanding yourself so that you can understand the world around you. Not in a selfish sense. Well, we're talking about the self, but to understanding oneself is different from being selfish. Being selfish means only caring about yourself alone. Knowing thyself means delving deep within yourself, looking, doing shadow work, as they say. Looking into different darker aspects of yourself, that make you feel guilty, you make me feel like a less of a person, to reflect on it and learn to accept it, to delve into your fears and to think of possibilities and try to simulate your fears in a way, to become stronger. But that's, just overall life in general. Life is about reflecting and growing, but I know that a lot of people will have struggles understanding themselves, but that's why they need to separate their emotions from their individuality. That emotions are a very individual thing, but it's kind of like having a pool of water, that's kind of just, has like a rough wave every once in a while. It's different for everybody, like I said. Everybody has a different, ocean in their body per se, but then there's yourself. There is who you are as an individual, and that is who you need to discover and who you need to explore, because that person is you, and that has always been you, forever, always. You have always been you. Maybe not this body, maybe not this incarnation, but you still are your ancestors. You are still part of Midgard. You're still part of the earth itself, and you have always been a part of the earth itself. Of course, depending on your belief, but from a general heathen standpoint, the earth is the home. It is our home. It is, the center of what is sacred, and it is the center of what is essentially connected to the tree of life itself. And there are a lot of things I want to talk about in future videos. I know I keep saying I'm going to get into ancestor worship, and that is part of all this burial mounds talk. I talk of bones, I talk of the bodies and the parts of the self, and how it pertains to your descendants and your ancestral bloodline. And like I said, I will just say this, for those of you who haven't, really watched all my videos or know me as a person. When I talk about ancestry, when I talk about blood, I'm not talking about purity. I'm not talking about anything racy or racism based. I'm not trying to segregate or label anybody. I believe that everybody has an equal chance in striving for knowledge and finding their own personal path wherever that is. And even if that's not where they're physically from, if they can't trace their physical lineage back to a certain place, yet they feel drawn to another place, that is up to them. They can find people in those traditions that will accept them no matter what. And the people that aren't accepting, that's on them. That's their problem. But the whole point is to not be a dick, obviously. But you just overall be more accepting, be more understanding, and overall just, try to seek understanding within yourself before you look around and judge others or try to define the world, when you're already struggling to understand what makes you happy, what makes you who you are. Not so much, what you want to do as a career, but more so what you want to do, what sort of impression you want to make in this life, and especially for yourself and those you love and care for. What is your motive? And that's, in my opinion, the most important part of any spirituality. Well, no, I can't say that, but especially in old world traditions, there was an inscription found at the Temple of Delphi. where the prophet or the seeress of Apollo, excuse me, the seeress of Apollo, used to be, I forget her name already, but she was the spirit of Delphi. I think that's what she was called. And on the walls it was inscribed, "Know thyself," and that is something that appears in many ancient traditions, to understand yourself and to embrace yourself for who you are. I can never say that enough. But yeah, but without any further ado, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about in this video. I do want to make a shout out for a friend of mine. His name is Chris, and he has started a YouTube channel called The Pagan Planet. It is a general, a lot of the stuff for now is very Norse themed, but it is a very accepting and general channel, sharing pagan-based ideas, old world, earth-based ideas, self-accepting, self-love, philosophical stuff in general, revolving around the old world and older traditions, sort of a way to get people together. Please subscribe to him, and please subscribe to me. Please check their videos out. I will leave a link in the description. It is called The Pagan Planet. I'll write it right here, The Pagan Planet. Please check it out, and thank you so much. Please stay safe, everybody, and without any further ado, thank you and hail.